to them in part from that personal connection. Also because I'd never seen them before, which just made me curious. I thought there was kind of a visual awkwardness about them that I liked. You know, those weird handles that look like ears. The parts of them, like the foot, the container, the lid, the finial, are actually separate. Many of them, they're just stacked on top of each other, which I think also creates a sort of visual, formal awkwardness about them. So I was just drawn to them for many reasons. And that led me to, well, do further research on these objects, but also thinking about objects of antiquity. And then looking and thinking about many of ancient Roman and Greek objects, particularly thinking of like those white marble figurative statues that we've all seen, that our museums are filled with, and how those were are presented to us as white, when we know they were not as this. It's more of these colors that those were actually. Yeah. And so this started to think about this kind of constructed mythology of these sculptures, and how as white, and how that was established and proliferated in like the 18th, 19th century during the time of the Renaissance, to equate that racial whiteness with beauty. But the reality was, in ancient Rome, is you can be Roman and be German or Nubian or Ethiopian or Egyptian and so on. So these are some of the things that was thinking about in this work. Oh, here I have this. I always like this image. This is a tombstone from later in Italy, of a Norman Sicilian woman, I believe. And on this tombstone, it's Latin on the left, Greek on the right, Hebrew on top, and Arabic on the bottom. And so how that really shows this presence of this multi-ethnic Italy is always really fascinating to me. So with my own work, or how this kind of manifested in objects for me, I'll show a handful of images of these, what I call these sensory-based series. So, you know, thinking about ways to examine my own cultural lineage of Jewish and Italian heritage, to discuss these different historic narratives and power relationships. And so thinking about how these pieces amplify that kind of multiculturalism of ancient Rome, refute this lie of antiquity as being this homogenous time and place, which it wasn't, and thinking about migrations and diasporas, domesticity and ritual, because those kind of like going back to that original object and what they might have represented, trade and commodity, thinking about function and adornment. And so all of these objects are covered with multiple objects on them to tell kind of different narratives and stories. So this piece, Salt, in that kind of upper-ish band of it, those are different salt containers. And thinking about salt, a material that moves through different eras and cultures, it's a source of trade, of currency, of power, of protest, of preservation, and of healing. And then other objects on here, rope, hooks, which I kind of use a lot, thinking about things of movement. Let's see.
Hooks,
this
like
piece.
fish hooks?
What's that?
Are they hooks like
fish hooks? Yeah, those are some fish hooks in the middle there. Rope in parts. I started to use rope a fair amount. I really like rope. To me, I was thinking another piece that I'll show, which more about the sea and thinking about movement and migration.
Did you see the recent archaeological find of pieces of rope? It was like twisted hemp from much earlier than they thought.
That's familiar.
I have to look. I'll have to find that.
I don't know. I can't. That's familiar, but I can't remember the specifics of that. Yeah.
Just the idea that like twisting fibers together to make rope is such an indicator of advances in civilization in terms of, you know, staying in one place long enough to harvest it and use it in whatever format they were doing.
Yeah, because I was looking in some of these, I look at different grains and then how those grains were used to make fibers and rope and stuff. Yeah. This piece, oil lamp. So this piece, I was looking, in addition to those, the Lacanus objects, but for what's covered on this, I was looking at ancient Jewish oil lamps, which is those kind of, it's, it's somewhat monochromatic. So I don't know how clear this all shows in the image, but those kind of larger roundish objects on these are ancient Jewish oil lamps. And all the other things on this were images that were inscribed in the clay of these oil lamps. So there's some pomegranate, barley and wheat, and these combs that were used for the fibers. There's keys in the middle section there as well. And I have an image of it open. They're all lidded containers as the original object was, of the ones that I'm looking at. I like that idea of maintaining some element of utility. I think I'm just interested in that accessibility of vessels, really. So there was times when I thought, I don't need these to open, I can keep this as one form, but it's important to me that they still function as a container that you open, and that there's an inside and an outside there. And this piece, so this, thinking about fibers, this flax and spindles, weaving spindles on this, created using for textiles. There's, I think, barley seeds in here, and thinking about these, like barley as a crop that was taxed and controlled and sold in Roman colonies, but also a staple among ancient Jews. So again, like merging these cultures, my own kind of backgrounds on these objects in different ways. This one I feel like has a bit more of that awkwardness, those weird kind of ear handles. And I'd like them to be awkward. I think perhaps some of the earlier ones that I'm not showing you I don't like it as much, but they had a bit more of the awkwardness that I kind of like and would like to kind of continue with in some way. And then this one, weights and bobbers. So this one is more of that, there's hooks and weights and bobbers. There's rope and bits on here that maybe is not as evident. Thinking about the sea and of movement, movement of people, movement of goods, depictions of migrations and diasporas and so on in this piece as well. So that's kind of what I've been doing. These are just some of the ones I've made in recent year or so, last year or two. And, I've been thinking about getting back to work. I'm lucky I have a studio at home, which I'm sitting in right now, that I just haven't really spent much time in. But thinking about this moment that we're in, and how, a lot of my work as both an artist and an educator is about this idea of sort of decentering dominant narratives, this idea of deconstructing mythologies and stories. Questions like, who tells the stories, and what stories are being told or not told. And so, I've been thinking about how my work will be impacted by this moment, and thinking of the enormous amount of suffering that is going on right now as a consequence to the virus, but also thinking about how that suffering is really due more to the response to this pandemic, or lack thereof.
Or the inherent.
And this ongoing, this kind of constructed retelling of the moment that we're in, of the events, to suit, whether it's the inadequacy or the greed or power around this. And so these are a lot of the things that I'm thinking about with these objects, or have been. But I think that they have been more about looking back. And so, as I move back into the studio and making, I'm thinking about how these objects will change and be more exploring these similar ideas, but more about looking at the moment and ahead. And I'm curious about that. I haven't had the time or kind of the headspace yet to kind of settle back into a creative practice, but I've been thinking a lot about that, and how these will become more of a response to the moment that we're in.
And that brings up, I was curious, when you studied archaeology, I know it was undergrad, did you have a focus? Were you focusing on your kind of stuff from your own heritage at that point too? Or
no, I wasn't. And it was more like a cultural anthropology focus with a little bit of archaeology. I do remember looking a lot of Mesoamerican objects, and that might be because that was like the focus of one of my professors. So I was probably looking at a lot of like pre-Columbian Mesoamerican ceramics at the time, not really knowing much of anything about them. You know, I think I know probably a lot more about them now as a ceramic artist than I did honestly as an anthropology student. But I remember looking at a lot of those objects at the time.
And that's partially that idea that knowing the material has probably given you more knowledge about the people at the time than just the kind of study of it as a general object. So it's the value of art and art making across different academic focuses is brought to light a bit, you know, like the idea that you would have an art history or an archaeology class and not have to go throw a pot in order to really understand how that was done.
Mm-hmm.
So
I love that idea. And I love how that, I mean, I think that would have been so amazing as an anthropology student to have that hands-on experience with the material. I think, because you're right, as I started studying this more as an artist, it gave such more, just a whole other area of insight into the objects and the people and the place and the economics and the environmental, you know, and, you know, so much more, you know, came through actually the study of the material for me in many ways.
Yeah, the material has that physical knowledge in it. We had a great class led by a Temple professor who leads the public history course, Seth Brueggemann. He brought his class to the Clay Studio and they did a throwing intro to throwing for just one class period. But you know, that's what I would like to do more of. So figure out with Temple and other schools in the area how to engage those populations.
That's a great idea.
And
we need to contact the anthropology department when we get back to school.
Yeah. Well, and I can give you Seth's name. So this public history is almost, it's almost, all of these disciplines are so fluid. I feel like they're all kind of informing each other. You said decentering dominant narratives, which I think is a great phrase. And a lot of people in the chat are asking questions about your process. So that going from the concept of decentering to maybe talking about how do you actually build these things. Someone asked, is it all clay? I think the answer is yes. And also the size.
Yeah. Size, I should have, one's in the box at my feet. You know, they're not quite 2 feet, little smaller than 2 feet, I think. And they started as completely hand built. Well, not completely, there's some mold making, but like this was totally hand built. But I now, it's a combination. I'll talk maybe about this one. I throw all parts. So this is like, I don't know how many pieces thrown, multiple parts thrown, and essentially altered, assembled. And then many parts here, like for this part, the weights and the bobbers are a mold. A lot of them are just hand built. The shape, the objects are just hand constructed, but some of them like are just a mold that I slip cast and then attach. So it's a combination of thrown, hand built, and slip casting essentially. It's all ceramic. It's earthenware. I do low fire. I love that color of the clay. And then there's obviously some gold luster. I fire everything to 04, and then do a luster firing, that gold luster firing for those kind of accent points.
And do you think this is related to how those vases were originally, the pieces that your inspiration is from? Or,
you know, it's been so long since I actually looked into the process of their making. I can't recall, honestly. It's been a number of years since I looked into that, and I can't remember.
Well, and so that's not conceptually important to you, which is totally fine.
No, not so much. And then I pinch everything because I really am a hand builder. I mean, I started throwing like many of us do, and I actually have a wheel. I got a wheel a couple of years ago because I do really love throwing, but I'm really interested in the pinch. Everything I make is pinched, mostly. So anything I throw on the wheel, it finds its way. I let it stiffen up a bit, and then I pinch the whole surface. So you can kind of see that, I think, maybe in that neck thing bit there. I love that mark of the hand, and I think that goes back to like that anthropology, like, oh, there's the maker right there. It was always just like so, it was just such a draw and so amazing to me, like that material connection. And to me, that pinch holds that, and it holds that mark, it holds that evidence. There's a certain vibrancy in that. It's very kind of visceral, and I think of vessels, because I do work with vessels, and to me, the vessel is kind of a stand-in for the body, and so that mark also brings in that body connection to it as well. So I do a lot of pinching with everything.
Yeah, just that makes a lot of sense, that it brings it back to communicating that touch to the viewer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me just check the chat to see if anyone has a specific question about that. Anat wants to know if you can speak to the figurative aspect of the work.
Yeah. I think in part it's become more of a conscious decision. I think that began more with another series of mine, what I call, I sometimes forget the names that I give my series. I call them my torn pieces, but I might call the series Torn Geographies. And these objects that are, some of which I kind of have behind me, they're small objects back there, where I was thinking about people, essentially. And I think vessels, particularly vertical vessels, often have a natural reference to the figure. I mean, obviously, and perhaps not obviously, not always, the language we use in ceramics obviously does reference the figure. But I liked that I started to consciously make some formal decisions that maintained that reference, that figurative reference in the object. And I think that is because I want, like I said, that idea of the vessel to me is often a stand-in for the body. Sometimes it's an individual body, sometimes it's collective bodies, sometimes it's bodies of water, or governing bodies, or different types of bodies. But that, I think that it maintains some sort of foundation in the figurative body is important to me, because it is, I think, often about our stories in some way, whether it's past stories or contemporary experiences. So I like sort of some pieces, I think, where this was starting to just be kind of more of this, I don't know, like a ball shape. It was losing, I mean, it's vertical, so maybe that's figurative in that way, but I quite purposely tried to come back to this to maintain that reference to a figure for that reason.
Yeah, and there's, when you were saying body and like government body, and these were made for females and initially, or the ones that were your inspiration. Mm-hmm. So Anat, and then another person just wrote sort of similar questions about talking about the power structures and these things as power objects, referencing those bodies. And then someone was asking if you know anything about the going back to them being made for women. Were the makers women, or do we probably don't know, I would think.
I always assumed not.
Yeah.
But I don't have that definitively. I've always, like I said in the beginning, like the research I've done on them, it's a lot of like little small short articles, many of which were written decades and decades ago. And I found a dissertation of a graduate student from the 70s. And I, through interlibrary loan, got that. I think I might have mentioned this to you. I can't remember. And it's the original dissertation in this like beautiful thin paper. And that's like the most comprehensive writing that I've found on this, but it was written 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and it's not always, oh, sorry.
That's okay. But I don't, I'm trying to think of some of that. I always just assumed they were made by men, and I don't think I've ever found anything definitive on that.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't in a certain way, like right, it's just how you respond to it. So it would be interesting to know those things, but that's
Mhm.
not necessarily inherent in why you're using them. But the idea of them being female bodies, sort of, I mean, to me, a vessel is always about a female body. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I shouldn't think that way. But is do you have that idea of connecting it directly to the female, or has that idea also kind of like passed through? You know, you've moved to your own definition of these
Mhm.
rather than continuing to connect them directly to women.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was in perhaps part of the initial one of the initial things that drew me to them. But I think they've come to represent much larger things for me in the in the work itself and the making of these objects. I think they've come to be more of these um, of I don't yeah, I guess I have not been thinking so specifically about gender, and I'm like thinking as of this as I'm answering that, and I'm kind of curious to myself as to why, where that kind of ended, and I kind of moved from there. um I guess in some ways, maybe I think of them as, yeah, I think I've moved away from that, and I'd have to think honestly why. I haven't. I'd have to give that some thought. Yeah.
Yeah, because um, they're talking about like the fact that one is about salt and this one is about ocean, but not just the ocean. It's about trade. It's about the using ocean resources for economical purposes of like fishing and selling the fish and feeding ourselves. So yeah, I don't think I had thought about it that way either because I was so focused on their commodities,
Yeah.
which have power in them because they
Yeah.
have an effect on culture. So salt as a commodity, fish as a commodity, and then
Yeah.
and but maybe you know the female body has uh, many times and often throughout history been commodified as well. So there's maybe some lurking thing in
Hmm.
there. I don't want to apply
Hmm.
that to you, but anyway,
Yeah.
interesting. Everyone's sending us great questions. Jennifer Martin wants to know about your use of color.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a challenge. I find surface so challenging, and
Well, your
glazing.
surfaces are quite elaborate for feeling challenged
Yeah,
by them.
it's a continuous struggle. I think initially this series of objects, the earlier ones that I haven't really shown you, were polychromatic. I was using a lot of color and different colors to reference the original objects. But then I was like, but I don't like it. It wasn't working. I was using underglazes and glaze and terra sigillata, which I love terra sigillata. I do a lot. I've used terra sigillata for many, many years. Some of these have like some of these maybe have that. Some of this has terra sigillata in it. Some of it's glaze. A lot of it is glaze. Um, so I was really struggling with that, and I decided I don't want these to be, even though there are colors, I decided I want them to be kind of monochromatic, like I choose a color range for each one. And this was the one where I realized that this kind of blue and black one was the first one that was like, oh, it's not like everywhere on the color wheel, it's kind of exists in this one space. And I was visually much more interested and drawn to that. So these came after, where I kind of selected a color and then just explored glazes and surfaces that existed within that. So there was a lot of variety within this more narrow space. And I think I did that. In this one, I kind of wish I didn't do that background as black. I kind of wish I kept that green more throughout this whole one, more as I did this with just kind of these grays and blues.
Mhm.
I think just part of it is just a visual preference. I think it connects it. I like these objects a lot when they're green, before they're fired. And I think that's why I use terra sigillata a lot, because you can maintain that feel and look of the clay in terra sigillata when it's fired. And
Mhm.
I've thought about doing these at just terra sigillata, but I haven't. because I like the lusciousness of the glaze, and I like having like matte next to shiny. You know, I like that variety as well, where it holds light and where it reflects light. So I decided to go more in like picking a color, and just selecting that for each piece, because sort of going back to what I was saying, when they're green, they're monochromatic. They're just the color of the clay. And so I thought, this way I'm holding on to a little bit of that, even though it's clearly not the color of the clay. It's a glazed surface, but it kind of uniform. There's a certain sense of uniformity, and then it also, I'm interested in them becoming even busier and fuller. You know, I like the kind of piling and the fullness of them, and I think them becoming a bit more monochromatic can potentially do that a little bit more. So rather than separate, this object is red, this object is green, this is yellow, and so on, where it kind of separates it. So that's some of my thoughts behind this, but it's like it's an ongoing, such a challenge to me. It's like, it's whenever I have to glaze, even glaze that I know what I'm doing, it's like I don't know, I feel a lot of anxiety around glazing, and it never really goes away.
That's interesting. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, well, I love the idea that you sort of made them focused in like one color space, so that you could focus on some of the other aspects of
Yeah.
it, and it allows, if they were all different colors, it would be, yeah, it would be sort of anxiety
It's a bit, it's
producing.
just not, it's a little bit much for me. I think you lose, to me, certain elements formally were kind of lost with that.
Yeah, yeah. I love the combination of luster and the shiny glaze and the matte glaze, and just,
Yeah.
I think it's beautiful. There was
Yeah.
a question about, oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to I don't know if I used luster before I started doing this series. And that too, it allowed certain bits to kind of pop. But also I was thinking also, some other things that I was thinking about, I was going back to kind of the Jewish and Italian thing. I was thinking of Torahs and I was thinking of the very short period in my life. I was raised by an Italian mother and a atheist Jewish father, who felt like, I think in a moment in our upbringing, felt like they had to choose something, even though neither of them were practicing any religion. So they sent us to synagogue for like a minute. And what the one thing that stayed with me of that short experience was when we would be in the synagogue, and the rabbi would take the Torah out, and we would get that they would pick only a couple of kids at a time, and you'd get to kind of take, you know, I wish
Any
you
of
did remember the names, but take the parts off and present it. And to me, that I loved that ritual. And so also, like, some of this adorning and hanging and gold, I was thinking about that as well.
yeah, I can totally relate to the idea that it was a ritual of the various aspects of, you know, what I did for religion as a child as well, that were just drew me to them, which is, I think, is another reason why I went into studying art, because it's just like you see the power of an object to make you feel a certain way, and then you can translate that into understanding the world through that, through how other people are affected by objects and how you use them and see them. And yeah, the gold, this one, certainly if you weren't thinking about these being fishing bobs and lures and things, it would absolutely look like something that was yeah, more of a ritual object. Somebody did ask about how you attach the weights. Are they
It's metal. It's metal that I made
fired in?
holes in the piece before I fired it, and then I used these little bits of metal. I might have even, I think I fired the piece with the metal because I was worried that the holes would glaze would, you know, and I wouldn't. So I've done past work with metal in kilns, and so I have this steel wire around that I cut and I put it in, and I gave myself a lot more so that I can cut it back, make a little loop, and hang the weights on there.
Ooh. So we don't have too much time left, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your experience in Philadelphia and maybe specifically at Tyler. I know you were so busy teaching, I think, even when we were allowed to be walking around, maybe you didn't get too much of a Philly experience, although I know you lived here
Yeah.
before. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
But I didn't really. I mean, I'll talk a little bit about that, and maybe I know that we're close on time. I'd love, and then maybe I'll talk a little bit more about kind of the moment we're in. But
Yeah.
Philly, yeah, I like you said, I lived in Philadelphia for 2 years after grad school, which I think was like '07 to '09. I think I was living in Philadelphia, and then I left to do many different things, and very surprised to find myself back in Philadelphia. Really never thought I would be living back in Philadelphia, but
Here
I'm
you
happy to
are.
be here. What's that?
Here you are.
Here I am, exactly. And so I moved back here in August, just a couple weeks before school started, to start teaching. And the year has been so occupied with school that I was looking forward to the summer, really, to be a time to like do the things that I haven't had the time to do, connect to the people that I've been meeting but haven't had the time to spend any time with. I was imagining that being a big part of my summer, which it won't be, but so it still feels very new to me. And honestly, my time in Philadelphia since I got here has been like homeschool. It's like those have been the two spaces that I've moved between, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
so, yeah, then I guess just transition into telling us about your feelings for it now. It sounds like you're kind of ready to think about.
I am. I think, I mean, I think this. I think I perhaps many of us, but I think I've kind of entered another kind of stage of this experience. In part, maybe it's because school's over, and so there's a little space. In part, maybe it's just like we're a couple of months into living in the way we are. But I think I've been thinking about this a lot, mostly as an educator. Being a teacher and going through this experience. I've been having a lot of conversations with friends who are educators, with my colleagues. We've been talking about this more in the space of NCECA as well as educators. How are we going to move forward in this? Particularly those of us who teach art and teach material-based art, as many of us do with clay. And so I think for me, I think I'm actually feeling perhaps more optimistic than a lot of people that I talk to are, honestly. And I think in part, I think such moments as this, such moments of upheaval in which we are all in, I think for me, it presents opportunities for change, for shift to happen. And I'm thinking in part large shifts, whether it's in our healthcare system or in issues of labor rights or access to housing, climate issues. And then as it relates to our educational and art systems that many of us move through. And so I'm looking at like the cracks that exist in these systems and where the light is kind of shining. And that's what I'm thinking about and following. And how do we, what do we do in those spaces that we individually and personally move through? I'm thinking about the spaces I move through as a teacher, and I'm thinking about issues of accessibility in education, not just in education, but issues of accessibility, issues of affordability, inequities in areas of higher education, the precarity of our contingent faculty, which I was for many, many, many years, the dependency in our educational system on our contingent faculty, of our staff, of our technicians, and the precarity that many of them are in right now and will be probably for quite a significant period of time. And so there's this, I feel like I hear this craving to go back to normal. And to me, in part, we're not going back to normal because we can't, because in part, it's not safe to go back to that, but also I'm not interested in going back to that because I don't think that was, it was working for so many people. And so and I think that desire to go back to something but was before is really missing a really important opportunity to reconsider, in my thinking, you know, the educational system and how it's not working for many people. And I see this moment as like a pivoting moment, really. And so, and just I'll quickly say, and for those who are like, what do we do online? You know, I'm thinking about, I believe that fall teaching should be online, because I do not see that we will be in a place that we can do that in a healthy and safe way. So with that, what do we do? And I'm really thinking about the ways that this isn't for us, both as artists and as educators, to think about kind of how can we reimagine and reconsider our practice for ourselves, but also for our students. And wishing that more resource and energy by the institutions was being put into that thinking, where with time and planning, I think meaningful content can happen, and into the thinking of how do we provide our students with what they need to do it in a meaningful way, whether it's devices or access to stable internet or safe places for learning. You know, I wish that's where the discussion in our schools was right now. And I feel like that discussion has been kind of shifted to economics and sort of these false equivalencies that are happening there, where it's either this or this. It's either the survival of our school or health and safety. And I'm like, no, there's other ways of approaching this, and there's other conversations to be had. And so that's what I've been thinking about. And I'm approaching it more like, oh, this is an interesting challenge to me, actually. What happens when the parameters change, which they have? What can I do with that? As much as I would prefer to be in person any day with my students, in the studio, yes. But that's not the world we are in at the moment. So I'm more of, oh, how can we reconsider this in ways that are meaningful and in ways that supplement when we are back together, and we will be back together. So those are some of my thoughts. I don't know. I know that's been a lot of things that a lot of people, educators, have been having that conversation. So that was my kind of really quick sort of thinking about that at the moment.
I think that's wonderful, and it's really something, those same ideas should be applied to just our whole society. You know, we have all the problems, you know, the education system is a microcosm of the general societal issues that we're dealing with. I like the perspective that upheaval creates change, and that is can be a good thing, or there are going to be good. There will be many bad. There are many bad problems, but there are going to be some ways that our society will move forward that were needed. And as someone who studied anthropology, archaeology, history, for me, I mean, I think it's a natural way to think, because we have studied the past and have focused those ideas. You're looking at epidemics and wars from the past and seeing how those times really created, like you're saying, the light coming through the cracks that already existed. We had so many, you know, our society created, the way it has evolved has just really been leaving people behind, and in ways that hopefully we at least can see. Maybe, I don't know. Yes, I have hope too. Sometimes I talk myself out of it as I keep talking. I'm like, no, nothing's going to change. It's still about greed and power, but it is everyone's job to say, I see this problem now. Let's do something about it. And I think we can. I think
yes, and I have those days, and many I fall into that as well. Absolutely. You know, some days of quite, you know, a certain hopelessness about it. But I do believe that these are moments that could allow for shifts. But I think they need to happen collectively.
Yeah. I mean, and the education thing, and in terms of the Clay Studio as well, like there are lots of problems with how we're working things now, but we also we now have something like over 400 people have attended our last 5 weeks of lectures. I mean, this never would have had that kind of engagement with our artist talks. So that we have to find the places where positivity is happening and amplify them, and kind of, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just say with that, really, I think it's the challenge is I think we're overwhelmed, we're overburdened, we're anxious, we're exhausted. And so it's hard to do that. And I think that, I think these kinds of spaces that kind of bring us together to have these conversations are really important, because that's where you can find other people who perhaps are struggling with the same thing, working on the same thing, to find other folks to perhaps then, work with, to create that collective effort within the spaces, whether it's in the, community art centers, within academic institutions and other spaces that we move through. So I appreciate these opportunities, because it has allowed for me to kind of meet or start other conversations with people that, it makes me feel a little less crazy,
Yeah, yeah.
and overwhelmed when it's like, no, I'm dealing with the same thing, or I agree, or I don't, and this is what I'm doing or thinking. And so I think that's really important, and that we don't like kind of isolate ourselves and get lost in that, in that hopelessness.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I just want to say again how grateful I am that people have, decide to spend an hour with me in our conversations every week, and it's just that absolutely gives me hope and a feeling of doing something positive. So
yeah,
I want to just let anyone who wants to ask a question live, you're welcome to unmute yourself. We're at 1 o'clock, but we can spend a couple of minutes just answering questions, if that's okay with Lauren.
Yep, it's fine with me.
Okay, so anyone who wants, I haven't checked the chat lately.
Hi, it's Ann Hickey, and I'm a ceramic teacher, presently teaching ceramics, and this has been wonderful. I've actually used what I've learned from this. I talked about it today with my class, but my question for her is, okay, I know that some of my students are coming to Tyler, and they're super excited, but I think they don't know what's happening either. So I don't know. Can you give us the clue or something?
No, I wish I could. I think that's one of the issues here, is that we're all kind of, some people know, but many of us do not know. This is a conversation I'm having with my colleagues weekly. And essentially, everyone is waiting to kind of get word, as many schools are waiting to get word. And right now we're just planning for multiple scenarios. Personally, I feel like it makes more sense from the perspective of the teacher and the student, just for a decision to be made, so we could actually do the work that we need to do do it right and to make it meaningful. Otherwise, I think we're going to be in a really similar situation that we were in the end of this semester, which was not online teaching. It was just emergency mode. It was kind of triage, I think a lot of people are saying. But with time, we can put together content that exists in this space. So unfortunately, there is no word, and we're waiting. And right now, just meetings at school that are about, what if it's like this? What if it's like this? And just different scenarios. But that too is like, you can't really get deep enough into anything. So I'm hoping that we do here soon, which I hope we will, so that we can actually start to, that will be our summer work will be that, a lot of it, for a lot of us who maybe had other, expectations of working in our studio this summer. I think a lot of us teachers are going to be spending the summer reimagining an online curriculum.
Yeah, and that time to plan is so essential, because it really does need to be totally different. But like you said, we'll just have to find the opportunities and the ways that it can be positive and focus on those, because I don't think it will be forever. It's just, and I guess my last comment will just be that I continue to be optimistic that we will be adding in the positive things we learn from this to, you know, when we can pivot or adapt, because yeah, there's no back to normal. Not to say that what was happening before was normal anyway, but that idea of hoping for adding in those positivities is what keeps me going.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions before we let Lauren have the last word?
Okay, can I just wanted to say something. Really enjoyed this. I have access to the studio at a school, and I've been working by myself for weeks here. So it gave me a lot of opportunity to make new work, or, you know, and listening to this has been amazing. I actually stopped working at some point because I really wanted to listen and follow. I'm so grateful to Lauren because she has such a great contribution in our discipline, and that we didn't get the chance to talk about. Your role is important as a person who giving voice to women of color in our field, and that's very important. I'm so grateful to you personally, not just as an artist and educator, but as an advocate for women in our discipline. So thank you so much. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Rahele.
Certainly. That's great.
It's good to see you here. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Lauren, do you want to close us out there? Come on, say something really beautiful.
I've said it all.
You have. It's been wonderful.
I'm not sure really where to end it. I think I have said a lot of it, but yeah, I don't know. I'm open to continued conversations. You know, I really sincerely am. So anyone, you know, Rahele and I have been talking a fair amount lately, and that's been wonderful. And other people as well. And some of it is like through the space of school or through NCECA, and others have just been like as ceramic artists or educators. And I know this, there's a lot of uncertainty, and I'm just trying to figure that out as well, you know, kind of my next steps. So I'm happy to continue that conversation always. If anyone wants to talk or engage about any of these things, you can always just send me an email. I'd be happy to have that conversation.
Well, that's a good way to end, just being open to everyone. So thanks again, everyone, for coming. Lauren, thank you so much for spending your time.
Thank you, everyone. It's nice to see you all here.
Yeah, let's continue the conversation.
Absolutely.
Have a great day, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
I like to watch all the people going away.
Go.
Coming in and going back.
Here's Erica.
Thumbs up.
Lauren.
Yeah, I hear, Marilyn, is that you?
Yes, sweetheart, I'm so sorry about
That's okay.
I pressed the wrong button.
That's okay, Marilyn.
This is wonderful. I just
Thank you.
absolutely loved it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Marilyn. I'm so glad you were here.
Okay, sweetheart. Thank you. I'll call you later.
All right, I'll talk to you later. I love you.
Thanks for joining us. Yeah, that was really nice. Thank you.
Thank you. That was good. Hey, Erica. There's Erica. She's upstairs.
Oh, hi.
I hear you through the ceiling.
Hey, Lauren, I have a question.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
I was wondering, do you find yourself writing at all during this time period?
I haven't been. I think I just started. Have I been writing? Well, yes and no. I think I'm writing when I'm preparing for things, you know, when I'm giving a talk or preparing, you know, some talking points for meetings, like that's been my writing. I think just this week I sat down in the studio to try to work. And so I started a really little bit of writing and thinking about my work. So in those ways, I guess that's the form that my writing has taken as of late. There's other times when writing is a larger part of my practice, a more kind of structured part of my practice, but that's the way it's been kind of, that's the structure it's taken lately.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good question.
I'm happy to answer any other questions from like the 10 of us that are still here. If you have any.
There is something about the end of the call that I'm always like, oh, bye everybody.
Yeah.
Well, it's like a magical moment too. Who are
It's
the
like we're the
ones
last ones at the party, you know, that's when like the party begins.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if no one else has, I'll let you all go. I'll let you go, Jennifer, on to your next Zoom meeting.
Yeah, you too. Okay, thanks again, Lauren. Thanks everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody. Take care. Bye.